Emily and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances as the guards disappeared down the hallway. The seconds stretched into minutes. Neither of them spoke, both straining to hear any sounds coming from room 306. Then, faint but distinct, they heard Jason's voice. "What the?" Emily's stomach twisted. She took a hesitant step forward, but Sarah grabbed her arm. "Wait," she whispered. A loud crash echoed through the hallway. Something had been knocked over. Emily's instincts warred with her fear. She wasn't a police officer or a security guard. She was a nurse. She had spent her entire career helping people. But something about this wasn't normal. Then Jason's voice again, this time sharper. "We need backup. Now." Emily's heart pounded. She had never heard Jason sound scared before. Sarah reached for the phone at the nurse's station, likely to call for the hospital supervisor, but before she could, Jason and Mark reappeared, walking quickly down the hallway. Both looked shaken. Jason locked eyes with Emily. "You were right," he said, his voice lower than before. "Something's wrong in there." Emily swallowed hard. "What did you see?" Mark shook his head. "We're not sure yet, but whatever it is, it's bad." The air in the hallway felt thick with tension. Emily could feel it pressing down on her chest. The minutes dragged by as they waited for the police to arrive. Every second felt stretched, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. Then distant footsteps echoed through the corridor, growing louder. The officers had arrived. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair, introduced himself as Detective Calloway. "You found something unusual in room 306, he asked, flipping open a small notepad. Emily nodded, recounting everything she had experienced. The smell, the stains, the noises from the bathroom. Jason and Mark added what little they had seen before backing out. Calloway's expression remained unreadable. "All right," he said, gesturing to the two officers behind him. "Let's take a look." As the officers made their way toward the room, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of unease. Whatever was in there, it wasn't just an abandoned jacket or spilled cleaning supplies. Something was waiting behind that bathroom door, and they were about to find out what. Emily stood frozen near the nurse's station, watching as Detective Calloway and the officers disappeared into room 306. The hallway felt colder now, the fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows along the walls. Sarah shifted nervously beside her, arms crossed tight over her chest. "They'll figure it out," Sarah murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Emily barely nodded. Her mind was racing. There was something deeply unsettling about that room, about what she had smelled, what she had heard. It wasn't just an abandoned space or a misplaced jacket. It was something worse. Then, from inside the room, they heard another sharp noise, a heavy thud, followed by quick, shuffling footsteps. The police radio crackled with static. Emily's breath caught in her throat. A few seconds later, Detective Calloway stepped back out into the hallway, his expression unreadable. He motioned for Jason and Mark, the security guards, to join him. The officers spoke in hushed voices, but Emily could catch fragments of their conversation. "Not just a vagrant. Doesn't make sense. How long has this been here?" Calloway turned toward Emily and Sarah. "Are either of you aware of any missing patients? Anyone unaccounted for?" Emily exchanged a confused glance with Sarah before shaking her head. "No, we keep close records of patient transfers and discharges. No one should be missing." Calloway's jaw tightened slightly. "And staff? Anyone reported acting strangely, not showing up for work?" Sarah frowned. "No, but what exactly did you find in there?" The detective hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We don't have all the details yet, but something or someone was in that room, and they've been there for longer than just a few hours." Emily felt her stomach twist. The smell, the stains, it all made a horrible kind of sense now. "Was someone living in there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Calloway didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, He turned to one of the officers. "Check the security footage. I want to know who's been coming and going from this floor in the last 48 hours. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. 48 hours. That room had been empty since the morning shift. At least, that's what they had thought. But if someone had been inside that long, hiding, waiting. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. It doesn't make sense. We walk these halls every hour. If someone was staying in there, we would have noticed. Jason, the security guard, exhaled sharply. Not if they knew how to avoid us. A heavy silence settled over them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. How long had this been going on? Had this person been here for days, weeks? Had they been watching them this whole time? Sarah took a shaky step backward. Oh my God. Calloway knelt beside the pile, lifting one of the fabric pieces with a gloved hand. It was worn, stained with something yellowish. Emily's stomach turned. Then another officer's voice rang out from down the hall. "We've got movement on the west stairwell." The group tensed. Calloway was up on his feet in an instant. "Go." The officers sprinted toward the stairwell, their radios crackling as they called for backup. Jason and Mark exchanged a quick glance before following. Emily could hear the pounding of their footsteps echo through the corridors. She and Sarah were left standing frozen outside the closet, the cold air pressing against their skin. Sarah swallowed hard. They're still here. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. Not only were they still here, whoever they were trying to escape. She took a shaky breath, staring down the empty hallway, knowing that the answers were just around the corner. And that whatever happened next would change everything. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood frozen in the hallway, her ears straining to catch any sound beyond the pounding footsteps of the officers racing toward the stairwell. Sarah gripped her wrist tightly, her fingers ice cold. Neither of them spoke, but the same fear flashed in both their eyes. Whoever had been hiding here wasn't just a lost patient or a harmless intruder. They were running because they had something to hide. A loud thud echoed from the stairwell, followed by the unmistakable clatter of something metal hitting the floor. Then, silence. Emily's body tensed. The officers had gone after the suspect, but what if they weren't alone? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Before she could process it, a noise broke the silence. A faint, almost imperceptible shuffle behind them. Emily turned sharply, her breath hitching. Room 309. The door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. She was sure of it. Sarah's fingers tightened around her arm. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she took a slow, hesitant step toward the door. It was like every nerve in her body was screaming at her to run the other way, but something deeper, something instinctual, urged her forward. With trembling fingers, she reached for the edge of the door and nudged it open. The room was dark. The air inside was thick, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. But as Emily's eyes adjusted, she saw something that made her stomach drop. The closet door was open, and hanging inside, neatly arranged, were several hospital uniforms. Not just any uniforms. Nurse scrubs. Some were faded, old, as if they had been taken from different staff over time. Others were cleaner, newer, like they had been stolen recently. Emily's fingers hovered over the fabric, her mind racing. Whoever had been hiding in this hospital hadn't just been sneaking around, they had been blending in. Sarah took a shaky step backward. Oh my God, what if we've seen them before? The realization struck Emily like a bolt of lightning. What if this wasn't just someone hiding in the shadows? What if they had walked past them in the hallways? What if they had been watching them from up close, pretending to be one of them? The pieces started clicking into place. The missing food from the break room, the times the supply closet had been mysteriously unlocked, the moments when Emily had sworn she felt someone watching her, but saw no one when she turned around. The intruder wasn't just surviving here. They were living among them. A loud crash from the stairwell sent both Emily and Sarah spinning toward the sound. The chase was still going on, but now Emily wasn't sure if the officers were after the real threat or just a distraction. And then from somewhere deep in the hospital, an alarm began to blare. A lockdown. The hospital was sealing itself shut. Emily's blood ran cold. If the intruder hadn't escaped yet, they were still inside. The blaring lockdown alarm sent a ripple of panic through the hospital. Red emergency lights flashed along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as she exchanged a wide-eyed look with Sarah. "They're still here," Sarah whispered, barely able to get the words out. Emily didn't need to be told twice. Whoever had been lurking in the hospital, stealing food, slipping in and out of rooms, blending in, hadn't escaped. They were trapped inside with the rest of them. Or had he wanted them to find him all along? The hospital felt different now. Even with the lockdown lifted and the alarms silenced, there was an eerie stillness in the air, like the walls themselves were trying to process everything that had happened. Emily and Sarah sat in the break room, neither speaking for a long time. Detective Calloway had left an hour ago, taking Dr. Bennett with him. The moment they had watched him disappear through the front doors, a strange emptiness had settled over them. The man they had worked alongside for years had been living a secret life right under their noses. It didn't make sense. Sarah rubbed her temples. "I just don't get it. He had a good job, a career. Why would he throw it all away toe?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I mean, what was he even doing here all this time?" Emily sighed, staring down at the cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Calloway said they're still investigating, but from what they found, it looks like he never actually left the hospital after his shifts. He just stayed, moved from empty rooms to storage closets, ate from the cafeteria when no one was looking, took what he needed, and when security started noticing things going missing, he got more careful. Sarah shivered. "That's terrifying. We walked past him every day. We probably said good morning to him, joked with him, worked side by side." She swallowed hard. How does someone hide in plain sight like that? Emily didn't have an answer. They had worked with Dr. Bennett for years. He had always been quiet but professional, good at his job. There had never been any signs, no warning that something wasn't right. But looking back now, Emily realized there had been moments. The way he never talked much about his personal life. The way he sometimes seemed distant, lost in thought. The way he always stayed late, long after his shift had ended. She thought of the closet full of scrubs, the makeshift bed hidden in storage. He had been living a double life, slipping through the hospital like a ghost, and no one had ever noticed. Sarah let out a deep breath. "Do you think he was dangerous?" Emily hesitated. That was the question everyone had been asking. From what they knew, he hadn't hurt anyone. He hadn't attacked them, even when he had the chance. He had run, yes, but only when he was discovered. "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but I do know he was desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Sarah pushed back her chair and stood. "I think I need some air." Emily nodded. "Yeah, me too." They walked out of the break room together, the hospital halls now quieter than usual. Staff was still shaken, whispering in small groups, trying to make sense of what had happened. Patients, thankfully, had been mostly unaware, just confused by the sudden lockdown. As they passed room 306, Emily slowed. The bed was empty now, the sheets neatly folded. Whoever had been staying there before had long since been discharged. And yet, the smell still lingered faintly in the air. The same strange, sour scent that had started all of this. Sarah followed her gaze. "It's weird, isn't it?" Emily glanced at her. "What is?" Sarah frowned slightly. That patient from room 306, the one who complained about the smell. They said it had been there for a while, remember? Emily nodded slowly. Sarah hesitated. "So, was Bennett staying in there the whole time? Or Was someone else? A chill ran down Emily's spine. She looked back at the empty bed, at the faint stain still visible near the pillow. For the first time since the night began, she realized they might not have uncovered the whole truth. One of the officers returned moments later, holding up a tablet with the hospital's security feed. The screen flickered as he scrolled through footage, stopping at a time-stamped clip from the previous night. He turned the screen toward Calloway. Emily and Sarah leaned in. The grainy black and white footage showed an empty hallway outside room 306. The timestamp read 2:37 a.m. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, a shadow appeared. It moved strangely, slow and deliberate, hugging the wall as it approached the door to room 306. The figure was difficult to make out, tall, thin, wearing dark clothing. The footage had no sound, but it was clear the person was cautious, stopping every few steps as if listening. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, the figure slipped inside the room. Emily felt her pulse quicken. Who is that? The officer rewound the footage, trying to get a clearer shot, but the angle was off, and the lighting was too poor to make out any defining features. The only thing that stood out was how eerily deliberate the person's movements were. Could be a patient, Jason suggested. Maybe someone who got confused and wandered in. Calloway shook his head. If it was just a patient, why hide? Why stay in there for so long without asking for help? Emily thought about the jacket she had seen, crumpled near the bed. Someone had been there. Someone had left that behind. And now, whoever, or whatever it was, they weren't in the room anymore. Which meant they could be anywhere in the hospital. A shiver ran through her. We need to check the rest of the floor, she said, her voice firm despite the knot of fear tightening in her chest. Calloway nodded. Agreed. No one leaves this floor until we figure out what's going on. The officers split up, moving toward different hallways. Jason and Mark followed closely behind. Emily swallowed hard. She had spent years working in hospitals, had dealt with her fair share of emergencies. Cardiac arrests, violent patients, even the occasional break-in. But this was different. This felt like something that didn't belong. As she and Sarah stepped forward, following the officers, a strange thought entered Emily's mind. If someone had been hiding in room 306, were they really gone? Or were they still watching? Emily's footsteps felt heavier with each step as she followed the officers down the dimly lit hallway. The hospital, usually a place of order and routine, now felt foreign, like something was lurking just beyond their sight. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the fluorescent lights, made her pulse jump. Sarah stayed close, her fingers gripping the edge of her scrub top like she was trying to steady herself. I don't like this, she whispered. Emily didn't either. Something was deeply wrong, and they still didn't have answers. As they turned the corner past room 306, one of the officers suddenly stopped. His hand hovered near his holster, eyes narrowed at the end of the hallway. What is it? Calloway asked, his voice low. The officer pointed toward a door at the far end, the old storage closet. Emily's stomach twisted. That closet hadn't been used in months. Housekeeping had moved everything to a different floor, and yet the door was slightly open. A thin sliver of darkness peeked through the gap, almost like an invitation. Emily felt Sarah grip her arm. That wasn't open before, Sarah murmured. Calloway nodded at one of the officers, who stepped forward cautiously. The rest of them held still, the silence stretching unbearably long. The officer reached for the door handle, his fingers curling around the metal. Then, in one swift motion, he yanked it open. A harsh beam of light from his flashlight cut through the darkness inside. The air smelled stale, like dust and something else, something sour. The officer took a slow step inside, scanning the space. Then he froze. Emily couldn't see what he was looking at, but she saw his back straighten, his entire body stiffen. Detective, the officer called, his voice tight. You're going to want to see this. Calloway stepped forward, his face unreadable as he disappeared inside the closet. A few seconds later, his voice came back, low and tense. "We have a problem." Emily felt an icy chill spread through her chest. The officer turned back toward them, motioning for Jason, Mark, and the nurses to stay put. But Emily took a half step forward, craning her neck to see inside. And then she saw it. The closet wasn't empty. Against the farthest wall, crumpled into the shadows, was a pile of blankets. No, not just blankets. Clothes, pieces of fabric, a jacket, similar to the one Emily had seen in room 306, and tucked between them, a makeshift bed. Someone had been living in there.